Do you like trees? Well, someone at Blizzard must, because Druids just got a hero spec tree dedicated to them. It's a tree. Hi, it's Llarold, and let's climb this tree. Before we even look at this, we should stop and look at the Force of Nature and Grove Guardian's talents for Balanced Druid and Resto Druid respectively, because that's what this tree is all about. So here's Force of Nature. It's a Balanced Druid talent. It's on a 1-minute cooldown, and it makes 3 treants appear for 10 seconds. They AoE taunt and attack enemies in the area, and they generate 20 astral power. They're not very good, and basically this talent is totally unused at this point in Dragonflight. It is in a choice node with Warrior of Elune, which does get used because it is better for damage, it's a shorter cooldown, and it's better for generating astral power, which is really what Force of Nature is all about. So it doesn't do the job of being a good offensive cooldown or anything at all. And again, it's in a choice node with a talent that just far outpaces it. Grove Guardians for Resto Druid is another story. It's a 20-second cooldown. You get 3 charges of it. It lasts for 15 seconds. And when you cast it, you summon a treant. It comes out and immediately blasts your current target with a Swiftmend, and then it just sort of bombs, nourishes into nearby allies until it despawns. It's okay. It's not great, but it's okay. Now we can look at the first talent here, Dream Surge, this balanced restoration druid, keeper of the Grove tree, and take a look. Force of Nature grants 3 charges of Dream Burst, causing your next Wrath or Starfire to explode on the target, dealing nature damage to nearby enemies. Damage reduced above 5 targets. I think that this, just on its own, makes Force of Nature capable of competing with Warrior of Elune. It's not as convenient since they're not instant. It does sort of make it so that Warrior of Elune kind of gets nudged out entirely. You can't really run this Keeper of the Grove tree and not have Force of Nature, so maybe that's a little concern, but whatever. For Resto Druid, Grove Guardians causes your next targeted heal to create 2 Dream Petals near the target, healing up to 3 nearby allies, stacks up to 3 charges. Presumably that means that you could spam out all 3 Grove Guardians at once, and then you would have 3 spells that would each create 2 Dream Petals, and the Dream Petals sort of seem like light wells, maybe. I'm not sure if there's something that players need to walk through to heal, or if they just sort of radiate healing. It says that they spawn near the target and heal up to the 3 nearby allies, so sort of sounds like they're more like light wells. They just sort of radiate healing, and that's okay. If we scroll down a little bit here, we have Treants of the Moon, which makes your Treants cast Moonfire on nearby targets about once every 6 seconds, which is very strange wording. Usually they will say how often they cast them. I'm assuming that it's probably because your Grove Guardians will actually be casting Nourish, and maybe Force of Nature guys will be casting stuff, but the fact that it's about every 6 seconds is weird. For a Resto Druid, this basically means that, these guys have 15 seconds of uptime, 20-second recharge, so potentially they could maintain Moonfire for you automatically, which that's okay. It's not a huge amount of damage, but it is free damage, so I guess you can't really turn your nose up at it. For Balanced Druid, it's not as great. You're getting 10 seconds of uptime every minute. You're getting basically 1 free Moonfire, maybe 2 in that time. If they cast Moonfire as soon as they come out, you'll get 1 about 6 seconds later, so you'll get 2. If they wait 6 seconds to cast the first Moonfire, you're just getting the 1. Not great for damage. Not really great for healing either. It's a Moonfire. The second talent here is your maximum mana is increased by 5%, and your maximum astral power is increased by 20. Maximum mana going up is useful for Resto Druid. It does give you a little bit more mana in the pool to burn out, and Resto Druids have recently had a lot of mana problems, although they have gotten a buff, or I guess a reduction in mana cost, so they've been made a little bit less mana starved within the last couple of weeks, but if that same design and tuning carries forward, they probably will want this extra bit of mana. That is kind of appealing for Resto. For balance, a lot of people tend to balk at this kind of bonus, like if Warrior had an option to get 200 as their max rage instead of 100, people would say, well, that stinks because it doesn't increase the sim damage. And to some extent that's true, but getting a larger max pool means less chance of overcapping, more ability to pool up for bursts, so that's useful. It's not a throughput increase really, it's more like a small, tiny quality of life increase, but it's not great thus far. Again, we're 3 talents in now, and the only damage increase that balance has is that when you cast Force of Nature, you get your next 3 Wraths or Starfires to do a small nature explosion. Not so great. And now here we have Protective Growth. Your regrowth protects you, reducing damage you take by 8% while your regrowth is on you. Okay. This seems like it's probably good for any sort of PvP. I mean, it's not like terrible for Mythic Plus to get 8% damage reduction if you cast a regrowth into yourself, but you're probably not going to be doing that as balance. So we're kind of 4 talents in here now, and we've really only gotten 1 damage increase for balance. We've only really gotten 1 good healing increase for Resto either. So thus far, this tree isn't looking great. Now on the left-hand side of the tree here, we have a choice node between Power of Nature and Durability of Nature. Power of Nature, your Force of Nature treants no longer taunt and deal 20% increased damage. This is potentially very good. Historically, Force of Nature was a talent that balanced druids would run on necrotic weeks or weeks where tanks really needed taunts. Necrotic is no longer in the game, thankfully, and I certainly don't hope it's coming back. I don't think it's coming back, so that aspect of Force of Nature really isn't anything that I think players would miss. Like, the random taunting is more annoying than anything else to tanks. Dealing 20% increased damage, it's not like these guys do a ton of damage on their own, so 20% more isn't really all that huge, and their cooldown is still pretty long for their relatively low uptime, so this is a pretty small damage bonus. For Resto Druid, your Grove Guardians increase the healing of your Rejuve, Efflow, and Life Bloom by 5% while active. Now that's not your whole kit of healing by any stretch, you know, it's not Regrowth, it's not Wild Growth, it's not Swift Mend, but it is 3 of the heals that you have, so it's okay. And given that you have basically 75-ish% uptime on Grove Guardians, it's not a terrible bonus for Resto by any stretch. This is definitely the first decent bonus other than the very starting talent for Resto that we've seen. Durability of Nature, by comparison, makes your Force of Nature treants have 50% increased health, so this is specifically making them better as tanks. This seems very much like a solo player talent and really doesn't seem like it would have any value in any sort of organized group play at all for balance. For Resto, your Grove Guardians Nourish and Swift Mend spells apply a minor Cenarian ward that heals the target over 8 seconds the next time they take damage. Pretty decent. It really is just a matter of tuning and kind of how good Rejuve, Efflorescence, and Life Bloom are for healing in a given patch as to which of these 2 talents is going to be better. You can either get a little bit of extra burst healing out of Durability of Nature that's sort of reactive, or you can just get a bit more passive healing all the time through Power of Nature. I think these are both very similar. You know, it's like, I don't have a good metaphor for this. We're going to move on. Cenarius Might makes it so that casting Star Surge or Starfall increases the damage of your next Star Surge or Starfall by 10%, stacking up to 2 times. Casting another spell cancels this effect. This is good. This is basically a burst damage or a sort of burn phase bonus. So you can get, once you've decided to dump Arcane Power, you get the ability to basically dump even harder and get more damage out of it. That's good, and it does synergize nicely with Expansiveness. By having a larger astral power pool to be able to dump out of, you are then able to get a little bit more damage. So you could cast 3 Star Surges in a row, and then you would be doing more damage with that. That sounds nice. This makes sense. This is pretty good, like, makes sense, adds a lot of damage, looking good. Unlike some other stuff over on the left-hand side of the tree, this is all right. Casting Regrowth, Wild Growth, or Swift Mend increases the healing of your next Regrowth, Wild Growth, or Swift Mend by 10%, stacking up to 2 times. Casting another spell cancels this effect. Sort of similarly, this basically makes you want to just kind of chain cast the same spell for a while. It's a bit of a weird design. It's just not really something I love. I kind of like flowing back and forth between skills rather than just jackhammering on the one. And yeah, I can't say I'm the hugest fan of this design from a healing perspective. Like, as a burn phase, dump all your resource and then regen it back up, that makes sense for a DPS, especially if you have some sort of increased damage taken phase on a boss. But for healing, not as into it. Over on the right hand side, we have Grove's Inspiration and Persistent Enchantments. Grove's Inspiration just makes it so that Wrath and Starfire damage is increased by 12%, which is fine. They're a decent chunk of your damage, so just flat damage, nice and simple. And for Resto, Regrowth, Wild Growth, and Swift Mend healing are all increased by 6%. Again, just a simple healing increase that synergizes decently with Cenarius's Might. You know, you're getting up to 20% more healing on those 3 spells out of Cenarius's Might, and then just a passive 6% more out of Grove's Inspiration. Very simple, but not bad. Persistent Enchantments makes it so that Orbital Strike applies Stellar Flare for 20 seconds and Primordial Arcanic Pulsar, that's fun to say, grants Celestial Alignment for 2 additional seconds. So you have a choice here basically of just more sustained basic damage out of Grove's Inspiration versus a lot more burst damage from Persistent Enchantments. And I think Persistent Enchantments will probably be the better option. Generally speaking, burst damage is a lot more valuable. It comes at a much higher premium. It's harder to get burst damage than just sort of sustained damage. But it really depends on what kind of content you're doing. For Resto, Reforestation grants Tree of Life for 2 additional seconds. Again, this is sort of a burst healing decision versus just steady healing. I think the exact opposite is going to wind up being true for Resto. I think the steady healing is probably more valuable than 2 extra seconds of Tree of Life. But, you know, in certain raid fights, maybe that extra bit of added Tree of Life uptime, that added healing output during a very hard burn phase could be the difference between a group staying alive or dying. Now over on the left-hand side, we have another choice node between Bounteous Bloom and Early Spring. For Bounteous Bloom, your Force of Nature treants generate 3 astral power every 2 seconds. That does make them a significantly stronger astral power cooldown. You get the 20 up front and then 3 every 2 seconds, so that's another. If you get 6 ticks, because they're only up for 10 seconds, so if you get a tick instantly, that would be 18 astral power. If you have to actually wait for 2 seconds for them to tick, then you would get 15. Still pretty good. Almost doubles the astral power that they generate. And then for Resto, your Grove Guardian's healing is just increased by 20%. They don't do a massive amount of healing, but you know, it's free real estate, nothing bad about that. Early Spring, by comparison, makes it so that Force of Nature's cooldown is reduced by 10 seconds, so that's about 15% cooldown reduction, and Grove Guardian's cooldown reduction is the exact same percentage, 15% or so. It's 3 seconds, which brings them from 20 to 17 seconds and then 15-second uptime. So almost 100% uptime out of Early Spring. That's probably, I mean, technically speaking, 15% cooldown reduction. I think that would wind up being less healing than Grove Guardian's healing being increased by 20% from Bounteous Bloom. Bounteous Bloom is definitely a bit more bursty. Early Spring will be a little bit more consistent. I don't think there's a huge difference between these two really for Resto, but for balance, Bounteous Bloom is definitely better. Definitely better for burst astral power regeneration, and unless you really need that cooldown being reduced by 10 seconds to specifically fit some sort of Mythic Plus pull rate or raid boss damage windows, I think you would rather just have the burst of astral power all at once from Bounteous Bloom. Power of the Dream and Control of the Dream are the final choice node here, and Power of the Dream makes it so that Force of Nature grants an additional stack of Dream Burst. Dream Burst being the damage bonus that you get from casting Force of Nature. So you get 4 charges instead of only 3, and healing spells cast with Dream Surge generate an additional Dream Petals, so instead of 2 Dream Petals, you would get 3. How much healing that provides, how much damage that provides is still unknown. I would imagine it's probably unknown to Blizzard as well. They're probably still working on that, but it's an interesting you know, adding a little bit more juice into the top level talent is always kind of a fun synergy in all of these talent trees we've seen so far, so this is decent. Cenarius' Might, the talent right above, increases spell damage or healing by an additional 5%. So presumably that's per stack, so instead of 10% more damage of Star Surge or Starfall stacking up to twice, it would be 15% stacking up to twice, so 30% more. And then the same with Regrowth, Wild Growth, and Swiftmin. This is pretty good, actually. This really, really emphasizes the things that you like about Cenarius' Might, the sort of chain casting to really dump out a huge amount of burst damage all at once. Control of the Dream makes it so that time elapsed while your major abilities are available to be used is subtracted from that ability's cooldown after the next time you use it up to 5 seconds, and this applies to Nature Swiftness, Incarnation Tree of Life, Force of Nature, Celestial Alignment, and Convoke the Spirits. This is very confusingly worded. Basically, it works like this. If you let Celestial Alignment sit on cooldown for 5 seconds or more, then the cooldown will be reduced by 5 seconds. If this actually carried all the way up to some larger amount than 5 seconds, you know, if this was like a 30-second amount of cooldown reduction for sitting on a cooldown, this could be pretty good. 5 seconds is a real tight cap, though, and I just don't see this really being useful. Again, unless there's some very specific end raid boss where you have an intermission, which is where I could see this getting some great value, where you're not losing out by not casting. You're sitting in an intermission, Celestial Alignment, Convoke, Force of Nature, whatever. They're just sitting there waiting to be used. And then you use them as soon as you come out of that intermission, and now you get a bit of cooldown reduction on top. That's all great. But the 5-second cap is pretty brutal. It really would have to be on, I mean, very short cooldowns for that to really feel like it's having an impact. Blooming Infusion makes it so that every 5 regrowths you cast, make your next Wrath, Starfire, or Entangling Roots instant and increases the damage they deal by 100%. And every 5 Star Surges or Star Falls you cast, make your next Regrowth or Entangling Roots instant. So this makes it a little bit easier for balanced druids to get some value out of Protective Growth. You can throw out a bunch of Star Surges or Star Falls, and then eventually you'll be able to instant free regrowth yourself. And then you get a bit of damage reduction after the fact. That's okay. This really isn't all that great. I really see this much more as a talent for Resto druids. You are casting regrowth some, and then eventually you'll get a free Wrath or Starfire to throw out. It's instant. It does double damage. That's okay. That's about all I really see out of this, unless this has like no duration on it at all, and you're able to occasionally, over the course of like several pulls throughout a dungeon, throw some regrowths into yourself for free as a balanced druid, and then finally, after having done that a bunch of times, you can throw a Starfall out, instant for double damage, or Starfire, instant for double damage. Like, that's... maybe there's something there. I don't really think so. I could see this being a situation where during an intermission or before a fight, you're spam casting regrowth into yourself to get that free Wrath, Starfire, whichever you're going for with double damage, which sounds like a very annoying chore. And yeah, I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. So, not great. It's probably the kind of thing that Blizzard would just make clear on a raid boss pull anyway, so it would be a non-issue. But obviously, if that's not the case, and balanced druids are all making tanks do like 25-second timers so they can spam regrowth into themselves a whole bunch of time and get Starfire ready to double damage hit, I'm gonna be ready to wring their stupid chicken necks. Finally, we conclude with Harmony of the Grove. Each of your Force of Nature treants increases damage your spells deal by 3% while active. So you get up to 3 of the Force of Nature guys at once. They have a really long cooldown, which is really what undermines this as a useful talent here, because the idea of getting like 9% more damage from Force of Nature is honestly not bad. It's okay, and it certainly synergizes nicely with some of these things like Bounteous Bloom, where you're not just getting all this extra damage, you're also getting Astral Power for using them and Astral Power while they're active, and that's pretty cool. And for Resto Druid, each of your Grove Guardians increases your healing done by 3% while active. Again, same sort of situation, except the difference here is that Resto gets so much better uptime on their Grove Guardians. Like if you're taking early spring, you're getting 85-90% uptime on Grove Guardians, realistically. That's a pretty decent increase to healing, 3% more healing with all spells, and then also some of the other bonuses that you're getting in here to your spells. Like that really does add up to a lot more healing. So I think for Resto, this really is a talent tree that could add a lot more consistency, a lot more steady healing across a whole group. And that's okay. I wouldn't say it's splashy or like amazing, but I do think it's maybe is interesting. We'd have to see what Wildstalker looks like for Resto to really have a basis of comparison, but there is something there. For Balanced Druid, I find this falls flat, and it falls flat because of the underlying design of Force of Nature. Force of Nature just isn't all that great. Now, if Force of Nature got a rework, like let's say it also got clipped down to a 20-second cooldown and then kind of balanced around that to have very similar uptime to Grove Guardians, I think this talent tree would rock. I think the amount of astral power you would get out of it, the amount of damage value you would get out of it would actually be pretty good. Right now, this is definitely a tree that Balanced Druids, at least from everything that I've seen feedback-wise, Balanced Druids are not thrilled. They're often not thrilled, so it's a little easy to look at them and go, oh, they're crying wolf for the millionth time in a row. But yeah, there's a massive amount of stuff going on in this tree. I mean, this has taken me significantly longer to record than any of the other talent trees because it basically is two trees at the same time, and that kind of is a perfect summation of how this is balanced as well. Pun not intended. It feels barely like a talent tree for balance, and it feels like a pretty decent talent tree for restoration. Not exactly got all the bells and whistles that we've seen on like the Lightsmith Paladin for Holy or the Oracle Priest for Disc and Holy Priest, but definitely some real discernible value here for Resto Druid. I mean, it gives you more healing, it gives you more mana. What more could you ask for as a Druid, right? More healing is always good. Balance probably would want more damage, and I think in this case their complaints about being undertuned are actually pretty justifiable. Alright, that's it. Thanks for watching. Bye.